Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
And it's not just Kate and I at the moment recording with you all. Jen is here too.
He is, which means at some point he will interrupt everything in order to leave my lap and get out of the room. So,
as cats inevitably do. They interrupt everything. But he's adorable, and I'm very happy to get to see him on screen today. So, Jen is also with us, even though you guys can't see him. So, wanted to include that in our little intro today. And also, there's really exciting news to start off with promotion time, which is that we have 3 new patrons that have come to us recently, which we're very grateful for you guys. So, I'm going to shout out Caitlin, Kyle, and Tara. So thank you all for becoming patrons.
Thank you. We really appreciate you.
We do indeed. If you also want to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/dbtandme. You can also show support for the podcast by going to our Etsy shop. So once you go to Etsy, just search for DBT and Me. And we also love any support in the form of ratings or reviews on Apple Podcasts, or checking out our other podcast, which is The Couch and the Chair. Wherever you're currently listening to us now, you can search for The Couch and the Chair and find our other podcasts and give that a listen if you have some time to spare. And last but not least, if you have thoughts, feedback, questions about today's episode or anything DBT related, send us an email at dbtandmepodcast@gmail.com. So getting into what we are talking about today, we are going to be talking about DBT in the workplace, because this is a really common theme that comes up. We see it in the Facebook group. So you guys hear things about this on Q&As regularly with people having questions about struggles they're having at work. And so we broke it down into 3 main categories of issues or difficulties, you could say. And we're going to talk about each category and talk about the skills that we think could be helpful if that's a thing that you are struggling with. And before we dive into talking about it, we're going to prep you all for the closing moment early. So as we are going through the 3 different challenges and talking about the skills for each one, try to bookmark as you are listening which challenge you feel you most struggle with and which skill for that particular challenge that you think would be most helpful for you to start implementing into your life. And Kate will recap this very briefly before the closing moment. So if you get to the end and you've already lost track, that's okay. But we wanted to mention it at the beginning in case that's helpful to really be keeping an ear out as we go through today, because it will help you when the closing moment comes up at the end.
Well done catching saying keep an ear out instead of keep an eye out. I think I would have said keep an eye out despite it being a podcast.
Do both.
There you go.
Pay attention and notice.
No, and I mean, it makes sense, of course, right, Michelle, that this is such a common theme because for many people, this is a huge chunk of our waking hours. Right? Yes. Like just of our life, of where we find purpose, right? Like there's so much going on there that it makes a lot of sense to me that this is something that gets touched on a lot. But so the first challenge or difficulty that we imagined was basically difficult relationships. So this could be relationships with your coworkers, you know, whether that be people on level with you, maybe your bosses or supervisors, or even supervisees, customers, right? If you're in some sort of customer service or customer facing position, or clients, right? If you're, I don't know, say Michelle or I, and that's how you refer to the people that you work with as your clients, right? These are all folks that we can struggle in our relationships with, right? They can be conflictual. They can be, I don't know, just complicated.
We're just like, this person is not my cup of tea, but I have to see them every single day.
Right. Or there's maybe a lot of like trepidation around authority. I can say for me, that's definitely a thing that impacts how I interact with, or maybe struggle in some of my past relationships with colleagues, setting boundaries, right? There's just a lot of stuff right, that goes on in the relationships at work, because again, we're spending some of the time, huge amounts of time with people. See, as we spoke, there you go. There goes Jen off the lap. That wasn't actually too bad. Now we'll see if he lets me let him out. So, sorry guys, let me get him out of the room and then we can recommence.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I can just keep it going while you do that. I think
he startled me because he started chewing on one of my lanyards on my shirt, and so I was like, "Why?"
Oh, geez. Unexpected
he's so
there.
well behaved.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're summarizing it really well, Kate, of all the different ways that this can look. But yeah, this is a huge source of stress that we hear about from people, is that it's not even so much what they are doing on the job, like what their job title is or what their tasks are at work that cause them stress. It really is the relationship piece of it. It really is that piece of having a relationship with a coworker that, yes, is conflictual or just difficult in some way, shape, or form, or being really worried and stressed out about interactions with customers or clients and how those are gonna go.
Dealing with getting treated like shit by customers, right? I don't know.
Exactly.
At least in America, that horrific phrase, "the customer's always right."
Mm-hmm.
Which, if anyone's ever worked with customers, they know that's not true. That's patentedly false, right? So yeah, there's so much emotional distress that can come up there. And so yeah, there's definitely, I suspect, like with most things that we go over here, Michelle, we could list more than the next 3 skills that we're going to as ways to deal with these situations, because right, as we were talking about, it's a huge part of your life, and there's a huge array of potential relationship struggles you can get into at work, right? What if you work with someone you're dating? What if you start dating someone you work with, right? There's so much that can go on. But these were the top 3 that we wanted to share today. So take it away, Michelle. What's the first one?
Sure. So the first one, it could really apply also to relationships with coworkers, supervisors, that kind of a thing. But it really seems like this would be a skill that you might want to use most if your difficult relationship struggle is, like Kate was just saying, when you have customers or clients who are treating you badly. And that's what's causing you stress at work, is trying to deal with people who are really dysregulated and upset. And it's your job to help them and to try to diffuse the situation and be of service. That can be very difficult to do. So the skill that we thought of that could be helpful for this is give. Now, I want to reiterate a couple things about give that I think are misconceptions about the skill. I think people sometimes think that if you're using give, it means that you are basically going to be like a doormat. Like you're just going to make it all about the other person and you're not going to stand up for yourself. And I mean, the purpose of the skill is to, I mean, it has so many purposes, right? But it's to be connection building, right? You want to build up a relationship, or it can be relationship repairing. So if there has been a rift, if there's been a misunderstanding, this is the skill that you want to go to. It doesn't mean that you have to, you know, I don't know. I'm trying to think of what term or phrase to use.
Acquiesce.
Like, yeah, that works. It doesn't mean that you have to acquiesce or give in to everything that the customer or the client is wanting, but we do want to use these principles of give to hopefully help the other person feel seen, and so that you are able to maybe find the kernel of truth or give some validation to what their experience is. Like, even if it's not your fault with what they're experiencing, you at least want to validate perhaps that it's hard for them with what they are going through with the situation at hand. And out of all 4 letters of give, the heart of give is the V for validation. That is the heart of it. If you're doing nothing else, hopefully you're validating. But I don't know. I'm trying to think of a random example off the top of my head, but I can think of one, which, don't get me wrong, like this listener was super great, not upset. All of our listeners, I mean, you guys are the best. But we've had a couple times where like we've sent out mugs from our Etsy shop and they arrive and the mug is broken or damaged in some way. And it's not like we've gotten customers coming at us being super upset about it. They've just been like, hey, this happened. What could we do? Like, can I either get a new mug or can I get a refund? That kind of a thing. But let's say, for example, that that's the situation. And what if a listener in this case, got really upset at either Kate or I about this, right? Just was going off about like, this was for my friend. It was for their birthday. Now I don't have a birthday present to give to them. And why didn't you guys pack it in with like bubble wrap and blah, 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 blah. And I could take this approach of like, it's not our fault that it showed up broken. That's probably the postal service's fault that it showed up broken. Like the mail carrier's fault specifically or something. Like this has nothing to do with Kate or I. I could take that approach, but that probably isn't going to help things. What would probably help is to say, oh, I completely understand how disappointed you felt when this arrived and it was broken. Let's figure out what we can do to make this situation right. I think that the interested part of give will also really help too, where sometimes you'll get customers or clients who might be very, very verbose. Like they might have like just a lot to say about the situation and go on and on and on with complaints and concerns and all of this. And you're probably wanting to just get them off the phone or get them, out of your line. And again, your line, right? I'm thinking of all these different workplace situations and trying to filter them through. Yeah, you're just wanting to deal with the situation and have them move on and get out of there. But acting interested is going to make a difference and may actually lead to them speaking less, because people are more likely to keep going if they are feeling misunderstood. If that's their perception of, this person who I'm trying to explain my concerns to is not getting it, I'm going to keep talking and keep going until they get it. And if you're using give, that will show them that you get it, that you're interested, that you're valuing their concerns. And that may actually make your life a whole lot easier than if your body language is giving off what you're really feeling inside, which is that you don't want to be dealing with this. They can sense that from you. It's not going to make it better, which is why right there's the act interested. You don't have to be interested, but act interested, and it will hopefully help. So yeah, using give, a good place to begin if that's your struggle is with dealing with angry, upset people at your job.
Yep, especially right, like you were saying, customers or clients, which I would say is the inverse of this one. Not that you could not use this next skill with customers or clients, but this one's going to be more oriented towards like inside the workplace relationships. So with your colleagues, your supervisor, your boss, things like that. And that's the dime game, which honestly I feel like we never reference. And so I love that it showed up here. Yeah, I love it. It's making a surprise guest appearance, and I like it here because this seems like almost what it was meant for, right? How often in the workplace do we have to decide how to respond to a request that's being made of us? And how often to make a request of someone else, right? Like how strongly to, or say no, right? There's the opposite side of things, but, right. The boss is saying, hey, everybody has to work overtime this weekend. All right. Well, I had plans. Where do I land here, right? Do I just immediately cancel all my plans? Do I try and negotiate with my boss? Is this like, no, I'm sorry, the plan is the birth of my own child. They're inducing me, you ignorant fuck. I'm not coming into work, right? Like, I don't know. Where are we on this scale? Right? The dime game is actually really helpful in helping us ascertain because, especially if there's something that has a lot of emotional content to it, that can, the dime game can help keep us from being quite so firmly, I think, in our emotion mind, which I think can be really easy in these sorts of things. Requests can be, trigger anger or resentment or even fear. I will just call myself out, and there was no request I could bring to a boss that didn't make me, and I am not exaggerating, literally shake with anxiety. So my emotion brain would have been like, nope, nothing, no request I could ever make could possibly be reasonable. Run. Right. So I need something to show me, no, this is a perfectly reasonable thing to bring to your boss to ask for, right? The dime game can be really supportive there too. So whether you're prone to having your emotions run away with you in a do or don't do kind of manner, and you could use a little reining in, a little grounding back to reality, I think the dime game can be amazingly supportive there, both as validation sometimes, like, yep, stand your ground, you're entirely right, your boss is being an awful human, and or to be like, ooh, yeah, maybe.
Pick and choose your battles.
Pick and choose my battles, and this is not the hill I want to die on. Okay. So, yeah, I think dime game's a relatively straightforward but handy little skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because it's not an often mentioned DBT skill, even though we do have a whole episode about it, if you haven't listened to it yet, you can go and listen to that episode. Also, if you just want the quick version of what dime game is.
I didn't say what it was in the slightest.
No worries. But just Google it, right? Just Google dime game DBT, and you'll find the handout, right? It asks you to go through 10 questions to help you make the determination, like Kate's talking about, of how strong do I ask, how strong do I say no, and yeah.
I wonder if in the future they will ever rename it, just because, I don't know about you, but the last time I handled physical change was a while ago. I don't have a lot of dimes hanging around. I don't know if I have 10 of them. I'd have to use M&Ms or something.
I like that. Reading the M&M game. Find 10 M&Ms. 10 candies. Yeah. That would work for me, because I have a baby sweet tooth.
But yes, you're supposed to ask yourself a series of 10 questions, as you were saying, to determine how justified or unjustified is an ask or a no. Right? Basically.
Yeah.
Am I being too simple? Would you add to that?
No, I think that's great, right? Since for the purposes of this episode and all the skills we're going over, we don't have much time to take a deep dive into each one. I think that's a perfect short explanation of what you're getting at. Awesome. The last one here that we were thinking of for this challenge, which I think could be applied to all of what we're talking about, right? Give is best for difficulties with customers or clients, the people you're serving at your job. Dime game is best for difficult relationships with coworkers, bosses, etc. This one can be used for all of it, I think, which would be using stop. Mm-hmm. We love stop. It's such a great skill. It can be so universally applied to lots of different stressful situations where you just need that reminder to really take a breath, pause before you decide what you're going to do. So with stop, the S stands for stop. The T stands for take a step back. And I want to really address those two letters in this conversation about using skills in the workplace, because those may be the toughest two letters to do. What DBT means when they say that the S stands for stop is they literally want you to stop. Like the moment that you realize, I am really starting to get emotionally distressed here. Like I'm at like an 8, 9, or 10 on a 1 through 10 scale of how stressed out and overwhelmed I'm feeling. It will be best for you to try to do something to take care of yourself and bring your level of stress down before you continue. So literally, this is intended to be that the moment you realize that, You stop what you are doing. Like if you're in a conversation, you end the conversation. If you are, I don't know, let's say you're alone, but you're probably doing something, right? We're doing something most of the time, whether it's like reading, eating, whatever it is, to stop the activity that you're doing and then to take a step back. And ideally, the T with taking a step back is meant to be that you take a physical step back. You go in another room, you remove yourself from the situation at hand. And I just want to name that I know those two things can be really hard in a workplace. Yep. You can't always stop. For example, if you are on the phone with a customer who is, just, super upset and you can't just, and you're feeling worked up, you can't just stop that phone call a lot of the time. Like you are supposed to carry it through until the end. So even if you can't literally stop in the middle of what's going on, what I want to urge you to do is to try to find the next opportunity you can to stop. So that might be, with this example, if you are on the phone with a customer and the call is just going left and it's a really tough call, that means that after that call is done, you might need to do something to take a step back before you would do the next call. In some workplaces, especially if you have a really supportive boss or supervisor, you might be able to tell them, hey, I just need a minute. Like not like a formal break, but like, I just need a minute. And you might be able to ask for that. And they may be like, oh yeah, like take a minute before you continue. And we know that that isn't always the case either. And that if you are going to take a step back, sometimes you might not always be able to physically leave the space that you're in, right? If like I worked at a grocery store when I was younger and I could not step away from my check stand unless it was for break or lunch or that kind of a thing. Like if something really distressing had happened, I probably could have gone to a boss and be like, hey, can I please, right? But I really wasn't supposed to just take a step back. I would have gotten in big trouble if I just walked away from my check stand and didn't say anything to anybody. But it wasn't time for my break. So we know these things can be difficult. So a couple of suggestions. I say this all the time with stop. If you've been listening to the podcast long enough, you might know what I'm about to say, which is to say you need to go to the bathroom. That is the best way to do stop. And I understand, depending on how stressful the day is, you might start to raise some eyebrows if you're saying you need to go to the bathroom like 3 times in an hour. So yes, be selective about when to do that. But that is a way to take a step back, to get a little bit of privacy, to regroup before you return. That is a socially understood and acceptable reason to take a break. So that is one way to do it. The other thing is that if you can't physically take a step back or get yourself out of the room you're in, whatever the case may be, is to take a step back mentally. So one of the things that we talk about, actually, I think as part of the accept skill with push away, you want to do some push away stuff. So that could mean like you imagine something that represents the stressful situation going into a box. Or you can visualize yourself walking away from, again, something that represents that stressful situation. Just imagine yourself getting some distance from it and telling yourself, this is when I am going to be able to physically get a break. And that's when I'm going to, I'm going to listen to some music that I really like, or I'm going to let myself cry for a couple minutes because that person said some really hurtful things to me, or I'm going to call a friend real quick on my 10-minute break. Or you can plan ahead a little bit for when I'm able to take that step back. This is what I'm going to do. And then that can really help, even if you're still having to sit at your desk or, like I was saying, stay in your check stand or whatever it is. If you can't take that physical step back, there's still some ways to mentally take that step back. So those two pieces felt really important to address more in depth. And then the observe and proceed mindfully, those can be challenging. Those can be challenging to do. But a lot of that is just trying to tap into your wise mind ever so slightly to figure out, okay, yeah, what can I do in this moment to take care of myself? And how can I make sure that I'm being intentional about that? How can I take care of myself for the rest of the shift while I'm here? And then trying to act on that if you can. So that's what I got for that one.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like it. I think also, little tricks for being able to take. I like your bathroom break. I don't know if anybody else has done this, but I did have a phone's position before, and I'm a big fan of any version of, can I put you on hold for just a second while I...
Yes, that's such a good one too.
And the while I can be absolute bullshit.
Yeah, or I need to go check on something in the back.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'll be back in just a minute. You can do that. Yep.
That's the thing, right? So, like, it's, I am generally a painfully honest human being, and I am not above a little deception in the name of self-care, right? And, like, making sure that you're not in a terrible place where you're going to do something way worse than tell a little white lie to somebody. Right? Because if we don't stop ourselves, before, getting over that precipice, it's really possible that we do something way worse. So, just a thought.
Yeah, awesome. That's a really good thought, and those are some also like really good ideas to throw out there. So, yeah, thank you for that.
All right, you're on the next one.
On to the next challenge. Oh boy. This one is a very tough challenge, which is what to do if you're struggling with burnout at your job. When you are working in a position where you just do not like what you are doing. Somewhere between, I don't like my job and I absolutely hate and physically dread going into work every single day. Somewhere on that spectrum. This is a little different between, oh, well, some days I don't really feel like going to work. We all have those days. Yes. But really recognizing that this job is one that maybe causes you a fair amount of stress in your life. Either, again, because of what we were talking about with the coworker or customer-client relationships, or because you don't like what you're doing, or because of the hours you're working, or whatever it is, there's just some reason or another for why you're feeling really, really burnt out. So we wanted to talk about some skills for how you can cope with burnout. Kate and I have both been there.
Yes.
It's not an easy place to be. And sometimes well-meaning people in your life might try to tell you, well, you just need to find another job. And that is all well and good. And they may not be wrong. And we also understand that that is not a simple thing to do. Yeah, it's not necessarily that easy. And sometimes that would come with a whole other amount of stress to try to leave the job you're at and find a new one, rather than trying to recharge your batteries a little more with the job that you're at. So we talked about 3 skills for the last challenge. We're going to be talking about 3 skills for the final challenge, but this one felt so important that we're going to be talking about 4 skills for what it looks like to cope and deal with burnout, because it's so difficult.
It is so difficult. And I, for one, have mostly done it badly. So I do want to say that I do not, I am in a glass house and have no rocks to throw here. But it is because of that I can absolutely guarantee, right, that there is no stupid choices you can make that make a hard job easier. Amongst those being staying up too late, which leads into the skill that I'm going to talk about first, which is please, right? So I don't think this is universally true, but I would say it's often true that the more stressed we get, most of us have one or more components of please that starts tanking faster and harder than others. Our weak point, perhaps, in there, or just the thing that responds to our stress. And I think oftentimes that also ends up being something that in its own right then recontributes to our stress in one fashion or another, forming a pretty gnarly little feedback loop. For mine, like I said, it's sleep. If I'm dreading going to work, I dread going to sleep, because the next thing after going to sleep is going to work. And so I will put off going to bed. But then I'm just exhausted. You want to know what's worse than a job you hate? A job you hate while you're exhausted. Mm-hmm. Right? And that may be that right, if you're eating too much or too little of different things that doesn't serve your body well, right? And then that just makes it harder to do whatever it is that you have to do for work, right? If you're not treating physical illnesses, if you're numbing yourself or upping yourself with mind-altering substances, right? Like whatever it is, whatever the poor choices you might be most naturally inclined to make. And again, no stones throwing here. Right, that's gonna make the underlying problem harder. It just is. It may not make the job worse, but it makes it worse to deal with the job. It makes it harder, more difficult. You're just less well-resourced, right? It's like if you send 2 people into the grocery store and someone you're giving $700 and the other person you're giving $7, they're just not going to be able to do the same thing, right? Like they're not going to be able to buy the same groceries, right? Like it's not, they don't have the resources for it, right? So please, I see as being a way to bump your resources, right? How do you help give yourself more of a pool, more of a resource pool from which to draw, especially at a time during burnout when, let's be fair, your pool probably has a bigger drain than usual. Right? You gotta adding stuff in with the stuff that's draining out, right? Or at least try and stem the tide a little bit. And I think that's really how I conceive of please in this context, is just as resource management. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you were touching on this too a little bit of, I view it as we don't want to make a bad situation worse.
Yep.
And yeah, exactly how you were explaining. Your job is already hard enough for whatever the reason is that you're struggling to be there. And if you're not attending to please, it's just going to make it even harder.
Please may not make anything better, but not attending to please will sure as shit make stuff worse.
Yes, that is true.
So,
that's
there you go.
True.
Try not to overpromise. What's your first one, Michelle?
Yeah, so my first one is willingness, or if needed, some radical acceptance too, I suppose. I'll speak a little bit from personal experience here when I was struggling with burnout. So I was burnt out when I was working at the teenage girls group home that I've mentioned here and there throughout the podcast, because it's how I found DBT, was by working there. And it was an incredibly difficult job. I mean, there were days where I was physically assaulted. There were days where I had to call the police multiple times. Every day, I was called a bitch and yelled at by the girls that I was working with. It was really, really, really difficult. And the thing, like we're talking about with trying to find things that will serve you, like how please will serve you, right? Not going to change the circumstances of your job, but it will help. And the thing that helped me to combat my burnout a little bit was practicing some willingness, because I had days where I would go into work and I would be already trying to anticipate what might happen and trying to mentally prepare, which makes a lot of sense in some regards, but I couldn't truly prepare. I had days where I went into work thinking it was going to be a great day, and it was an awful day. And I had days that I thought would be complete and utter shit shows, and they were great. So I learned pretty early on, I couldn't truly predict how a day was going to go. And willfulness is all about focusing on what's going wrong, what we don't like. We get really caught up in shoulds when we're being willful. It should be like this. So why isn't it like that? Because that's what's supposed to happen, right? Oh, so-and-so wasn't supposed to skip school today, kind of a thing. I could have easily thought that. And just really focused on everything that was going how I didn't want it to go. But when we switch over to practicing willingness, we're more able to be in the moment and we're more able to roll with the punches. So for me, willingness would look like with the job that I was at specifically, it looked a lot like just trying to think on my feet. And when a problem would arise, rather than getting so caught up in what caused the problem, or again, telling myself that this shouldn't be happening, this throws off the whole day, now what kind of a thing, to just be able to be like, okay, and I need to respond. I had to get very in the moment and very much in flow and just be like, this is what is happening, whether I like it or not. So let me just try to figure this out. And I also really tried at the end of my shifts to focus on something that had gone well that day. Some days it was really hard to find the thing that had gone well. But when we are taking a more willing approach to what's happening around us, it's a little easier to do that. It's a little easier to find the moments that are good. I'll also go back to, just because I love it so much, Kate, I'm going to go back to your Christmas tree farm example that you talked about in this episode. When all of your housemates wanted to go to the Christmas tree farm that you did not want to go to, and you wanted to be very willful and just say, well, I'm not gonna.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I'm not going to have fun. I'll go, but I won't have fun.
Yeah. And I think we have that approach a lot of times to work.
Thing to say.
To our jobs. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Well, I have to go, but I don't want to.
Yep.
This is terrible, blah, 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 blah. Rather than just, again, trying as best you can to show up with an open mind to what may happen that day. Because when we keep an open mind, that's when we're going to be more likely to be in flow and to be able to respond effectively when stressful things do happen, and to, make the most out of challenging situations. So whatever that would look like for your particular job, I understand that might look really unique depending on the circumstances, what and how willingness may show up. But having an attitude of willingness really can help with burnout, because we get so often into this way of thinking of, crossing our arms and being like, I just don't want to do this. Right? I'm tired. I don't want to go to work. I don't want to do this task at work. I don't want to work with this person at work. I don't want to do all of these things. Or again, why aren't other people doing what they should be doing? Why is it this hard? We can just get really caught up in that. So trying to change the internal dialogue can help.
That makes a lot of sense. So my next one is one of my favorites. Skills of all time, one of my all-stars,
all-star DBT skills.
Which is self-soothing, right? And I would say that most, if not all, people that I know who have been experiencing burnout or hate their job do something after work that is meant to be in response to their terrible workday, right? And this may be healthy stuff, if it is. Hats off to you. And a lot of the time, though, it's really not so healthy stuff, right? I think especially as adults, we're prone to, I've had a terrible day at work. I just want to veg out in front of the TV. I've had a terrible day at work. It's definitely a 3-beer night tonight. I've had a terrible day at work. I may need to make sure I stop by the pot store on the way to work. Or, fill in the blank here with substances. We're real fond of those, as ways to quote unquote cope, right? Well, they are coping mechanisms. They're just not necessarily coping strategies. And I'm, again, I don't know how many times this episode
No
will feel the
stones
need to
being
replay
thrown
this.
by either of us.
But I'm
a veg out on the couch person.
You should, right? So there you go. I've definitely been a veg on the couch person. And substances on type, right? Like we already have the mechanism in place that tells us I've had a real bad day. I need to do something for myself. We just seem to have a really difficult time appropriately labeling the things that we think of to do for ourselves. And so I would hand to you the concept of self-soothe for the thing to do for yourself after work, right? I think we get off track when we try to take care of ourselves as adults. We are not going to give our 3-year-old, 2 fingers of bourbon neat. That's not how we're going to help them have a end to their difficult day, right? We only start doing that because we're adults, right? We only start, vegging out. We only start numbing out. We only start, engaging in these. Well, actually, that's not true. Plenty of people, myself included, started engaging in wildly unhealthy coping habits before we were adults. But I think if we think of children, we stay better on track. And Michelle and I have both definitely talked about self-soothing, like a way to get into that mindset, as thinking of either how you would take care of a child or how you liked to be taken care of as a child. And I would really lean into that because in large part, it will probably mean that you're actually being kind to yourself in the moment, much more likely to be coming from a place of actual kindness, and the results are much less likely to be destructive or unhealthy. I felt a little bit meandery with that one. Did I come across okay?
No, you totally did. I did think of a couple things to tack on while you were explaining, though.
Yeah, please.
Which is, I would say, too, that self-soothe can also have a lot of benefits if you do it before work as well.
That's true.
Not just after.
That's fair.
I think of it, I also go to thinking of after work because most people maybe get off when it's evening time and like winding down for the night. And self-soothe sometimes has that slowing down sort of energy. But it definitely doesn't have to. If there are things that you can do to self-soothe and with your 5 senses, that's the full thing that DBT says it. Like if you're able to find some of those things that you can do with your 5 senses before work, that might help you go in a better mindset.
Or even during, now that you mention it, because I do have a couple of clients that I have had make self-soothing kits that they can take to work with them for if they are prone to having panic attacks or anxiety attacks or triggers or flashbacks or stuff at work. So
yeah, that could be really helpful. And then the second thing that I was thinking of, because maybe I'm just thinking of my current life circumstances with having a young child at home, it would be very difficult for me to self-soothe now immediately after work. Like when I walk in the door, that's not self-soothing time. That's like get dinner on the table, like do bath time, get him down for bed. Right. So can I self-soothe maybe once he's asleep? Sure. And also it can be helpful if that's your circumstances. And I know people are working from home, and so that might make it tricky too. But trying to do any kind of self-soothing during your commute could specifically be helpful, I think, for after work self-soothing. If there's music you can listen to in your car, or if like you have essential oils or like perfume that you could spray that like is a scent that you really like, trying to do something self-soothing that of course is not going to distract from driving. That's an important caveat. But do something so that when you get home, you are then in a better mindset too. That may also really help as some very specific self-soothing. So that came to mind for me. Cool. So, okay, last one, the 4th one, right? Because we realized that there's a lot to say on this particular challenge. This may not come as a surprise because it's such a foundational DBT skill to use, but we thought it would be important to talk about how Wise Mind can relate to this challenge of burnout. as I acknowledged when I was introducing this as a challenge, that sometimes people want to give the message that, like, we'll just quit your job and find another one. Simple. Solves all your problems. And it doesn't always, and it's not that easy. But we also thought it was important to close this section before we move on to our last challenge with talking about how getting into your wise mind is really important here. And the question that I would consider asking yourself to try to get into your wise mind about this topic is, why am I staying at this job? What is my why for being here? Why did I choose to get this job in the first place? Like, what made me apply for this job? So why am I here? What am I getting out of it? And trying to really get at the heart of either how this job is serving you or not serving you. If, let's say, as you're trying to answer that question of, well, why am I here? Why am I working at this job? And if you realize that all of your reasons are outdated, and what I mean by that is, let's say you're like, well, I wanted to get this job because of the hours. Well, now my shift is totally different than when I originally started. So now these hours aren't working for me anymore. No wonder I'm feeling burnt out. Oh, I got this job because I was really passionate about working with this specific group of people. Well, I don't know. I'm not really feeling so interested in working with this group of people anymore. I think I'd really like to work with this whole other group of people. If your reasons don't apply present day, this is something to start considering and using your wise mind to do it, of really getting clear on what the experience is that you are wanting to have from a job. People are motivated by different things when it comes to employment. I know many people, my husband included, they don't care if they hate their job as long as they're, making enough money to have like a decent living. That for them, that's what's most important. Is I'd rather have a job that I don't really like very much, but helps me feel stable financially, than a job that I love, but I'm broke. That's for him what he values. I'm the other way. I'd rather have a job that I love and I'm broke. But to really get clear on what your values are around work, and Wise Mind can help you do that. And is this job in any way aligned with any of your values? The thing that kept me going when I was burnt out at the group home, for me, that was intentionally a very short-term job. I knew that I was only going to work at that job for a year before I started grad school. So I had this light at the end of the tunnel that most people don't have a lot of the times with a job. But on the hardest days, when I was questioning, like, Michelle, why are you doing this? You can make more money working at a McDonald's. And it's true, I could have, because they paid us absolutely shitty. So why are you doing this? What's bringing you into work every single day? And my why was because I really wanted to get this experience before grad school. This was my first job in the mental health field, and I really wanted to get good experience under my belt that would make me look good when I applied to graduate programs. And you know what? It did, because I got accepted to all but one of the programs I applied to. So it worked. But I had to remind myself of that. This is why I'm doing this job. So use your wise mind to help figure out what your answer is to that question. And if you are considering looking for something else, use your wise mind to help point you in the right direction so that you don't wind up repeating the experience that you're having at your current job. So wise mind, wise mind, wise mind. All the time, wise mind. Forever and ever.
Forever and ever, all the time, except for no one lives there all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's not possible. We wish.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, true. All right, let's see. What's the third one? I'm so scatterbrained today, Michelle. I should just own that.
You're doing great.
Thanks.
You're doing awesome.
Woke up at 5:30 this morning and couldn't get back to sleep. Grumble. So this last one is all about the rest of life. We've spent a lot of time emphasizing, how much of our lives work does comprise for many people, which is true. But generally speaking, there's still, and even if you would joke that you have no life outside of work, you do literally exist at times when you are not at work. And so whatever, however lively your life outside work may or may not be, what does it look like when that outside life starts to interfere with your ability to do work effectively? This could be for so many different reasons. The first thing that came to me was just grief. If, you had a parent die, a pet die, a partner die, apparently I should say a parakeet because I'm on P words right now. Just right, someone passes and you're devastated, right? That can absolutely get in the way. If you're having to deal with familial struggles of so many different sorts, right? Starting taking care of parents, dealing with siblings or your own children, or right, like there's a lot that can go on there. It could look like a change in your physical well-being or abilities that is starting to change your ability to engage in the job that you have effectively, right? There's a lot of stuff that can come between us and effectively engaging in whatever our job is. Our own mental health struggles. Hello. Right? Either it's in our beings and our bodies and ourselves or our lives, right? But anything that isn't directly work related that is getting between you and doing your job the way you want to be doing it.
Mm-hmm. Great overview, Kate. You summed that up really well. So yeah, 3 skills that we're going to talk about here with what Kate was just describing. The first one is mindfulness. And mindfulness is so broad. But, the way that DBT talks about the one mindfully component of mindfulness really fits here. DBT says, when you're walking, walk. When you're eating, eat. When you're worrying, worry. When you're sleeping, sleep, so on and so forth. And when you're working, work. And I know that that's easier said than done. And at the same time, trying to, as best you can, when you are at your job, focusing on what is directly in front of you with the task that you are completing at work. Sometimes I find this is a personal thing that I have found helpful a little bit with assisting me with transitioning into a more mindful state or being more present when I'm at work and not being distracted by what's going on in my outside life, is to tell myself that there is nothing that I could do while I'm at work to maybe fix that stressful situation. That's an outside of work situation. Now, sometimes there might be, but actually most of the time there's not much I can do, right? If let's say what you're stressed about is that you have a partner who is at home sick and you're having to go to work and you're wondering, oh, well, how are they doing? Blah, 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 and you're feeling really distracted. You can just remind yourself, there's nothing that I could do to make them not be sick. I don't have a magic wand I can wave to take away their illness, right? They have soup. We have, say, I don't know, another support person who is on deck or they're with them in case they need somebody. There is nothing I can do. And that will hopefully be a really freeing thing to tell yourself. So then your mental reserves, rather than being focused on what you can't control, can be focused on what you can control at your job. And when we are present where we are, in this case being present at work, then that is going to put us in a better mental state when we do transition back to home. If all day long at work, you've just been worrying, super distracted, maybe not doing such a great job, maybe getting talked to by your boss, or again, having a customer or client complain about the care they received from you or something like that. And then you're going to go home. That's not going to be great to have all of that follow you. You're going to be better served going home if you are able to be mindful at work and able to, right? The 3 key what skills of mindfulness: observe, describe, and participate with the task that you are doing at your job. Then when you get home, you are going to be, I like how you were talking about it earlier, Kate, like better resourced.
Mm-hmm.
If you're worrying all day long, you're already going to be drained when you walk in the door after your shift ends. But if you've been mindful, hopefully you will be better resourced for when you get home to then deal with the stress that might be awaiting you. So practicing mindfulness is going to be key so that mentally you are at work when you need to be at work.
I really love how you pointed out that has benefits outside of just the work arena, right? That you'll feel better, be more resourced when you get back home. The other just reminder, as per usual, right? You're not going to go your whole workday mindful.
Oh yeah, no.
Right, like
not
just as often, like practicing mindfulness repeatedly throughout your workday.
Thank you. That's a very good add-on.
Less people be like, Jesus Christ, an entire workday? No, not an entire workday. Or if you can.
Just catching yourself in the mind-wandering moments.
But yeah, right? Especially when you're really dug in, if you notice that you're particularly drifting away from doing your job, that's a time to like focus back in, right? Bring yourself back to the task at hand, the place that you are, the where and the when that you are actually in. Right? Again and again and again, right? Like we talk about a lot. Right, the last skill I'll mention tonight is opposite action. And this one's tough, right? Because we have to make sure that we're doing, I don't know, now I'm having a hard time explaining what I want to say. Opposite action is all about the action being, well, opposite, right, to what the emotion urge is, right? So we're going to have to be really, I would say, self-aware of what the emotion is and what the action urge is so that we can make sure we're addressing the right thing. Because going to work may not necessarily be opposite to whatever you're going on within the moment. So I'm not saying, I don't know how to put this. Sometimes going to work is the correct opposite action, right? It is opposite to what the action urge is, and it is appropriately opposite to the emotion that you're hoping to shift by doing it. And sometimes it may not be. Practice some self-evaluation or inquiry. Because, yes, we're trying to help you have a better work life and do better at work. And probably keeping your job is a good way to do better at work most of the time. And also, please don't use opposite action as a way to force yourself to go into work under all circumstances. That's not necessarily appropriate.
Yep, because you want to check the facts before you're using opposite action. And so if you're checking the facts where it's like, oh, I don't know, my mom died yesterday and I'm feeling intense sadness. Well, that emotion fits the facts. So why would you be acting opposite? Yep. No. You want to honor that. You want to tend to that. And even
if, they have the one where it's like the subcategory of even if your emotion is like fits the facts and its intensity does, but the action urge doesn't serve you, which I think is actually honestly how I end up using it more often myself. But again, what is the actual emotion? What would opposition to that actually be? I don't know. If you don't want to go to work because you're real fucking angry at your boss.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't go to work. I'm just saying going to work is not opposite to that. It's not opposite action to your anger for your boss. Right? So just do some examination. Pay attention to what emotions are present, what you're really hoping to shift, and whether opposite action is even appropriate, right? Maybe everything checks the facts and efficacy doesn't matter, or maybe it is effective, right? And you're just not used to giving yourself that space or credence. So there are definitely times when opposite action is, as I know we've talked about before, Michelle, right? Just do it. Right? Sometimes you have to just do it. And that is often the case too, I would say, the sort of willfulness version of not wanting to go to work oftentimes, right? When I wake up and I just don't want to. well, then, yeah, I don't know exactly. I'd have to look at the emotion wheel myself to be exactly sure what that emotion is. But yeah, going to work is in opposition to that, right? But there's oftentimes more complicated layers. So spend some time in self-inquiry and don't accidentally punish yourself unduly with opposite action. I love opposite action. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan, and I think it's remarkably effective, despite the fact that I really hate that it's remarkably effective. But not always the right skill, so pay attention.
Yeah. What came up for me as you were talking about it is maybe trying to determine the difference between, with the stressful stuff that you have going on in your life outside of work, is that stress chronic or acute? Because if it's acute, right, if it's something that is short-term but really intense.
My mom died yesterday. Yep.
Then it makes sense, like you're saying, Kate, of, you're probably going to really want to tend to yourself and like forget work. Like that's probably going to be the right call there. And then also if it's more chronic, like the thing that came up for me was I was realizing when my maternity leave was coming to an end, which I did extend it by a couple weeks because that felt like what I needed. But obviously, like I was going to have to go back to work at some point. That was inevitable. I was going to need to resume seeing my clients eventually. And those first couple weeks back, it was hard. It was really hard to be at work because I was still dealing with some sleep deprivation stuff, as all new parents do. And, just with trying to balance and manage my role as a mom and my role still as a therapist and business owner, like, what does it look like? And I was having to practice some opposite action to, get myself to the point where it's like, nope, this is what you need to do. And this is what is best. Like, this is what serves you, is to go to work, even if it's hard right now because you're adjusting back to it. So yeah, there's a big difference between like, I don't know, having, say, a partner who is really, 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 really sick and you're like, gosh, I should really call out today to be home with them. And also having a partner where it's like, well, you know what? They are kind of maybe dealing with a chronic medical thing. Like I'm like worrying about them is just going to be my baseline. Like that's just what it's gonna be.
My
like, every day when I go to work, I'm gonna worry. Yep.
If I still called out sick from work every time I got nauseated, I'd have not had a roof over my head by now. So I had to learn to do some opposite action with that. I think the only reason I emphasize so much caution is just like looking back, the vast majority of the skills we've mentioned today, it's like, and who the fuck cares if that's quote unquote not right, like no, you ruined everything by practicing please when you weren't supposed to, right? Like there's not a lot of negative consequences, I think, to most of the other skills if they're quote unquote misapplied. I think it's even harder to misapply some of them. So I think my brain was just like, shit, this one actually could fuck up. Like
yeah, no, I'm super glad you emphasized that because I didn't think about it that way at first. And so when you were actually talking about it, I was like, Kate is really right about that. Like opposite action does not just mean get your ass to work no matter what. That is not what we are wanting to say. So I'm really glad you clarified that. That was important.
You want to bring it home with our last one for the evening?
Yes, I will. So the last one that we thought about for this is using accepts. So I referenced accepts briefly earlier, but to go into it a little bit further, accepts is all about distraction. So, the same way that we started off this challenge with talking about mindfulness and, Kate, you said it actually really perfectly when I was wrapping up talking about mindfulness, how when you want to apply mindfulness is when you recognize, oh, my brain is really starting to wander and not be on the thing that I'm doing at work. Let me see if I can bring it back to the task at hand and really be present with what I am doing. Also, I think that sometimes work can serve as a needed distraction from the outside stresses in our lives. I heard someone, I was at Lowe's the other day getting some stuff. I mean, gosh, I'm at Lowe's all the time. And this is not an endorsement in any way, shape, or form, let me tell you. But I always feel weird when we mention like specific companies and businesses on the podcast. But my husband and I are doing like home renovation stuff. And I was at Lowe's and I overheard the person who was in charge of the self-checkout that I was going through say something about how she was like really grateful to be at work. Because she's like, oh my God, my 2-year-old is like driving me nuts. Like, I'm so glad I'm here today. So work was serving as this distraction for her, right? This break from this stressful part of her personal life that she was dealing with at the time. I don't really know any other information besides that, but, work can be a good distraction. And so there were a couple specific letters from accepts that I wanted to pull out about how they can relate to a workplace setting. So the C about contributing, depending on what kind of work you are doing, if you have a job that aligns with contributing and helping other people, I mean, again, in any way, shape, or form, this does not have to look like being a therapist like Kate and I. This, like, when I think back to when I worked at the grocery store, there were times where I really felt my best at work when I was trying to really contribute to the customers that I was helping, right? Like if they were trying to bag their own groceries, being like, oh, I've got it. Like, let me help you out. Or, hey, do you need somebody to help you carry that stuff to your car? Like I could help you with that. Just contributing in any small way can really help when we're dealing with our own shit. Yep. So that letter can be really helpful. I already touched on a little bit the P for push away. That can be helpful too, the same way that I was mentioning it earlier with how you can imagine yourself getting some emotional, mental distance from the thing that's stressing you out at work. You can do this with the thing that's stressing you out outside of work too, right? When you show up at your job, whether showing up is going to your desk at home, if you're working from home, or going to a physical workspace, when you show up to do your work, you can do a little bit of push away with the thing in your life outside that is distracting you and taking up mental space. Yep. Imagine putting it in a box. Imagine walking away from it. All that stuff that I already mentioned. You can do some of that with the stressful things going on outside of work. Also, depending on the nature of your work, the T for thoughts may also really apply. If you have a job that's pretty mentally taxing, like you really need to focus and think and pay attention to what you're doing. I understand that there are plenty of jobs that are more, I don't know, I wouldn't want to say like menial labor, but like they just don't require a lot of brain power to do. And then other jobs where like you are using every inch of your brain space to do the tasks that you need to do at your job. So if that applies for your job, you can absolutely, you are probably using thoughts to distract yourself from stuff outside of work. So those were a couple letters that really stood out to me that apply to a workplace setting that you can use so that when you're at work, you are feeling sufficiently distracted while you are there from the stuff that's going on outside of work.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, what's your takeaway, Kate? What stood out to you from what we talked about?
Well, so, I mean, I don't know. This is obvious probably, but man, work is a complicated part of the human existence. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I just think about this and I think about the myriad experiences I've had, right? From the awesome to the abjectly awful. And just, how those impacted my life during those different times, right? Like what that meant, how my life impacted my work and how my work has impacted my life. And I don't know, it's not necessarily a real firm takeaway, but just like, Jiminy Christmas, man. It's a lot. Mm-hmm. There's a lot going on there. And just, I don't know, I occasionally reappreciate there's a DBT skill for everything. Mm-hmm. Or 7.
Yeah, how many did we talk about today? 10? think we talked about 10 skills in total.
10 skills today. And we didn't no repeats today, which is, I think, rare for us. We often end up repeating. So I'm like, whoa, but it's just also good for this one. So yeah, the DBT skills, the versatility and ubiquity. I think of DBT skills. What about you? What are your takeaways?
Yeah. For me, I think it really served as this personal reminder. Some of the stuff, honestly, what's interesting is that I would say for me personally, out of these 3 challenges, which one am I struggling with the most right now? It would probably be the last challenge we were talking about with outside life factors interfering.
Yep.
But sometimes I think that bleeds into the second challenge where I start to feel burnt out at work because I just feel like I'm not having enough to give to my job because of everything going on in my outside life. So some of the stuff for burnout was standing out for me. I'm not in a place of burnout currently, but knowing what that feels like.
Yeah.
It just kind of reinforced to me that those are some things that I want to be practicing more.
That makes sense.
Like, I want to be, I have been doing better with my Achilles heel for Please, which is exercise and body movement.
Nice.
I've been doing better with that, which really helps. Not great with sleep, which I can't blame on my child. He sleeps like a dream all through the night, but I just want to stay up late sometimes. So it just reinforced for me of like, oh yeah, just make sure I'm applying some of those things personally, applying Please, applying self-soothe to make sure that I am well-resourced going into work for the day, because sometimes I have outside life stuff that feels like it's drained me a little bit, so that when I'm showing up for work, I don't feel like I always have 100% to give, and I want to feel like I have more to give. So that stuff stood out to me really, like the Please and the self-soothe.
That makes sense to me. Correct me if I'm misinterpreting, but it sounds to me like you were saying, and if so, I wholeheartedly agree for myself as well, that like the less well I feel like I'm doing my job, the more draining my job is. Like those days where I feel like fucking on point. Like those are far less draining than the days where I'm like, oh my God, why are people paying me? Like, I mean, I suspect there's some chicken and the egg stuff there, but I think it's a really good point too.
Yes.
It's all interconnected. I know. See, I like your takeaway better, and I just want to emulate it, but mine is still what it is.
Yeah, no, you're totally right with the chicken and the egg thing, right? Okay, so I'm feeling kind of drained in my personal life, and then that means I go into work feeling drained.
Yeah. Which means I don't perform as well, which means then I'm more burnt out, which makes everything harder anyway. Yep.
Yep. Or like for me, I think the flip side of that is when I have a really good day at work, just to super simplify it down to saying a good day. I have a day where, I feel like I'm doing good work with my clients, and then I leave work and I feel better having done the work that I did that day. Then I take that energy into my home life.
That's true.
Where it's like, I'm coming home and I have a lot of energy to give. So they do. They totally impact each other. Very much so.
Right round. Okay. So before we launch into the closing moment, as promised, here's a quick recap. So the first challenge was difficult relationships, be those with coworkers, customers, or clients. So that's challenge 1. And the 3 skills we thought of for that one were give, the dime game, and stop. The second challenge is dealing with burnout or hating your job. And the 4 skills we listed for that one were please, willingness, self-soothe with the 5 senses, and wise mind. And the last challenge, number 3, is having outside life factors interfere with your ability to work effectively. And the 3 skills there were mindfulness, opposite action, and accepts. Okie dokie. All right. I think we're ready for the closing moment then, Michelle. Okay. So, as per usual, I invite you to begin by just finding a comfortable position for your body. Be sitting, standing, laying down. whatever feels good and right to you in this moment. And if you're safe and feel comfortable doing so, I invite you to go ahead and close your eyes. As per usual, begin by just tuning into your breath. You don't have to breathe any more slowly or any more deeply than you do naturally. It's just about paying attention. Just about noticing and focusing in on the rhythms and the sensations of your breath, and letting them welcome you into your body and into the present moment. So begin with tonight. Go ahead and bring to mind whichever of those 3 challenges either most closely reflects something you're going through right now, or maybe something that you've run across consistently in your work life that would make sense for you to try and prepare for facing again. Whichever of the 3 challenges stood out to you the most for those reasons, go ahead and bring that to mind. If it's something that you're going through in the moment, you may take a moment to really imagine the key players or what's going on in that situation. Bring the story to mind a little bit. Or if it's just something that's happened repeatedly, just taking a moment to remember the pattern, to remember how it tends to happen. Whatever it is that you've noticed tends to repeat for you in that challenge area. And then go ahead and pick a skill. One of the 3 or 4 skills that we listed tonight for that particular challenge. And imagine putting that skill into practice, either right now in the situation you're currently in, or sometime in the future when you face that challenge again. What might that look like for you? What changes might that require you making? Is there anyone you can think of who you could turn to for support in using that skill or losing it effectively? Or are there any struggles that you foresee yourself having in using that skill? And can you think of ways to support yourself through those struggles? If you succeeded at putting that skill into practice, how do you think that might change your situation? How do you think that might shift the challenge you brought to mind? Just taking a minute or so to play around with it a little in your mind's eye, how it might go, what you might need in order to achieve it, the kind of impacts it might make, who and how you can be supported. If there's any challenges that come up for you especially, take a moment to note one thing you might do to overcome that challenge in using the skill, that is. Especially if this is a situation that you're in currently. What's one solid step that you could take towards that skill this week? Maybe even today. Or if there's barriers to using that skill, what's the first step you can take in trying to overcome that barrier? But for now, go ahead and let that fade from your mind's eye and take a couple of slow, deep breaths. You might roll your neck or shoulders, your wrists or ankles. Whatever feels good and right to your body in the moment. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in